Hi, this is Alice Howarth, Open Research Project Officer from the University of Liverpool, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello, in this Making an Impact special for 2024, myself and guest host Sarah Ellis, the PGR Development Network Deputy Co-Lead, chat with Alice about the challenges of reproducibility in research and how to enhance the impact of research by promoting open research practices. We hope you enjoy. Alice, it's great to have you with us today, and we're delighted to speak to you about open research and reproducibility. But before we get started, could you please tell us a little bit about your background and how you have arrived in the position that you're in today?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So I've actually been at the university for a really long time. I joined in 2008 to do my undergraduate degree, and I stayed basically until now, with a couple of little breaks, because I did my undergraduate degree, I did my master's degree, I did my PhD, and then I started doing postdoc research at the university in various different fields in cancer cell biology, basically. And that I really enjoyed. And one thing that I experienced throughout my research days was that I recognised there were plenty of times when I looked to the literature to try and understand what experiments I could design next, and spotted plenty of experiments where if I tried to repeat them in my own hands and in my own lab, they didn't work. And I had problems with making that experiment work in my own hands. Now, that could be for lots and lots of different reasons, but it was an experience that I had over and over again. And it can be very demoralizing when you're an early career researcher that, what if I'm a terrible researcher? What if I'm making loads of mistakes? And then I kind of learned that actually, this is a really common thing that we encounter in science all the time, that there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't work in our own hands, that we can't repeat. And even some of our own experiments, sometimes we can't repeat. And there's loads of reasons for that we'll get into later. But I kind of had that, plus lots of other frustrations with research and frustrations around, this idea that we can only publish positive data and that novel findings are the most interesting to publish. And I started to get frustrated with how research went, and started to have these conversations with myself and my colleagues about maybe actually this isn't the space for me. And maybe I'm best placed to be offering support to other researchers. So that's when I made the jump out of academia and out of research into the job that I do now. So what I do now is I work in the open research team in libraries, museums and galleries, supporting staff in making their research openly available, publicly available, and easy to access for kind of anybody. I'm really keen on accessibility and making research accessible even beyond other researchers and into kind of the general public and things like that. And also trying to address some of these issues around reproducibility and how we can make science do what science should do and be self-correcting and allow us to have interesting answers to interesting questions that we're confident are the right answers to those questions.
Well, Alice, it's great to be guest hosting today. It really is a pleasure. Let's talk a little bit more about this open research. How can open research facilitate research reproducibility exactly?
So yeah, this is a question that I struggle with quite a lot, actually, because, as I said before, reproducibility is this idea that we want to get to the right answer, and that might mean that we do an experiment, and when we repeat that experiment, if it doesn't work, we need to understand why we're not repeating it. If the answer that we got to that question is true, we should be able to do those experiments in lots of different ways and come to the same conclusion. And if we don't, we need to understand why. So that's what reproducibility is and why reproducibility is important. But we obviously go down lots of routes that make that a bit more difficult. So, as I said, because we have competitive publishing in academic research, because we often prioritise novel findings, we might have publication biases. So that negative data gets dropped in the bottom of your file drawer and you never think about it again. And because we're all humans, because we want to find the shiny new exciting thing, we're prone to making mistakes. We're prone to getting super enthusiastic about something that turns out not to be the right answer, because it confirms our own biases, because that's what we thought might be true. And so there's loads of things that contribute to a lack of reproducibility. But it's not always immediately intuitive why opening things up can help with that reproducibility. So for me, I think the big thing is that it offers us some quality assurance. We can have other experts in our field check our working, because we might have shared our open data. So there's lots of different types of open research. We can share open access is the one most people know about. So this is just publishing your paper in a journal where anybody can read it. But one of the big things that I think is most valuable is open data. So you share your entire data set for people to be able to scrutinize the results that you've got in a positive way, in a healthy way, not in a, we're going to look for mistakes and tell you how wrong you did things, but also to label all of that data and allow people to reproduce those experiments and see if they can find any flaws, so that we're working collaboratively as a community on things. And then there's other positive sides to it, things like open methods. So I'm sure if there are people who do specific protocol experiments in the audience, that they will know the frustration of going to a paper and looking at the methods section and going, well, but you've not given me enough information. I need to know exactly what concentration of solution you used for this experiment so that I can do it myself. And that's often lacking. All the details are lacking from the methods. If you have open methods, you might have a really detailed SOP or protocol that you can share that has every step in it, which can be really useful for people wanting to reproduce your work. You can do things like pre-registration, which means you've designed your plan before you even started doing the study, and you told people that's what you were going to do, which holds you a little bit more accountable to following the research plan. It still allows you to be flexible and follow new things, but you've set out your goals beforehand, and that can be really useful for helping you plan and think ahead, and just it's that little extra step of quality assurance and being a little bit more careful, which I think is, everybody would agree, is an important part of research.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm already feeling more inspired about open research myself, as someone that doesn't know an awful lot just yet.
So what's your area of research in, Sarah?
So my area is Spanish literature. So I'm from a humanities perspective, and I'm in an early stage of my PhD. So obviously getting to grips with open access is something that I'm quite keen to do. So this is a really invaluable experience being on this podcast. Absolutely. And the next question will resonate with me as well as other researchers, but what can researchers do to make their own research reproducible, be it postgraduates or early career researchers? Do you have some tips for this?
Yeah, so I think open access is a great start, and we've made these amazing strides in open access in the last few years. And that's in large part, it's down to the funders have said, do you know what, we're giving you money to do this research. We want people to access it, which is fair enough, right? But I think there's ways that we can start to go beyond that. A lot of people are already publishing at least some of their papers open access. One thing I think is really valuable, both for the researcher and for general research reproducibility and open research and the general scientific community, is open data. I'm sure everybody's had the experience where 3 years down the line, you're thinking about that work that you did 3 years ago, and you try and find the experimental protocol that you wrote, or you try and find the raw data that you found, or you try and find all the resources that you worked on, and you put a lot of effort into, and you can't find it because it's buried at the back of your computer, or you do find it, but it's badly labeled and you can't make heads or tails of what you did and you can't make sense of it. So storing that data somewhere publicly available is really useful, because that holds you accountable to labeling it properly and encourages you to make it so that it's useful for other people, which makes it useful for you if you come back to it a few years down the line, which is really valuable. I think thinking about pre-registration is useful for people, because even if you didn't publish it, I'd love for people to pre-register every study they did, but even if you didn't publish that pre-registration, just going through the process of planning your research, thinking about what questions, what your hypothesis is, what you're looking to find is a really useful step for helping you think about the structure of your research. And then finally, I think the most important thing for any researcher is thinking about collaboration. How can you interact with other scientists, whether that's collaborating on an actual piece of research and working together on something, which I think is great, or just talking about your research at conferences or at network events and getting input and other people's opinions on your theories and understanding how other people do it, and also venting about those frustrations that you have, that we all have, so that you don't feel like you're alone in academic research, because it can be quite isolating, especially at the early career phases and PhD levels especially.
No, it's so true. You know, it can feel like quite an isolating experience. And I think collaboration, most people just tend to jump straight towards, oh, I've got to, write a paper with somebody, or I've got to work on a project. But actually, just being able to go out there and talk about your research, to people that are both specialists and non-specialists, is a really incredible skill to have. Absolutely.
When I was doing my PhD, I used to hit these kind of walls of, this experiment isn't working, or I don't understand what it shows. I can't fully get to grips with what my data has shown. It didn't show what I expected. It means something. I just can't get that from it. I talked to my mates in the pub who knew nothing about my research, because I just needed to verbalize it and say it out loud to somebody. And they'd ask me a question that might not be actually relevant to the research, but it would just make me think about it in a different way. Talking about our research is so valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so true. I'm actually forcing myself to do a few poster sessions and conferences in the next couple of months. So hopefully that pushes me out of my comfort zone and just lets me verbalize my research in a more coherent way.
Which I think is great. It's really important for you to be able to do that as an early career researcher, I think. And I know it's absolutely terrifying when you're not used to public speaking, and you've got to talk about something that you might still be getting to grips with and not feel 100% confident on. But I think it's important to remember that every other academic has been there. They're actually I know some academics can be difficult people to interact with, but a lot of them, they're really sympathetic and they know what it's like to be there. And if they see you struggling, they will give you the encouragement that you need, because we've all done it. We've all had our first poster session and frozen when somebody asked us a question.
Absolutely. Let's move on and talk a little bit about transparency. Maybe you could start by giving your own definition of what transparency means and how it improves impact and this open research.
Yeah, so for me, transparency is all about making as much of our method visible as possible. So to not kind of keep things behind closed doors, and to actually encourage that healthy scrutiny, to look at what we did and to share what we did. And to share the results and the data that we find, as well as the methods that we use to find it. When it comes to impact, I think there's loads of things that it's really worth thinking about. So impact is kind of that reach that your research has outside of your immediate community. And that can go from out to the wider academic community. And I think that's really important for collaboration between different universities, different parts of the world. Say, for example, you work in tropical diseases, you want to share your research with people in the global south, as well as your immediate cohort in the West. So that can be a really useful part of it. And particularly in the global south, there are sometimes access issues to big journals that are behind those paywalls. So making things open and transparent can be really valuable. But you also want to go beyond the academic circle. And this is where people can think about, does your work have relevance to policymakers? So I think it surprises people to think that a lot of policymakers have no access to closed journals. They don't have an academic library that has a journal subscription. So they need to access research. If we want So if we want science-informed policy, if we want research-informed policy, and we want evidence-based policy, we need to give policymakers access to the evidence, and in a really accessible way as well. So that can also be writing kind of more simple versions of a publication, or writing articles about our publications in addition to having written those manuscripts in the first place. That can also go to people, like if you work in a medical field, it could go to non-academic experts, so doctors who often don't have access to closed journals, or even kind of psychiatrists. Various different types of non-academic experts want access to the most current, up-to-date research, and often don't have that access to journals. And so making things publicly available can really help clinicians make decisions about what to do in the best interest of their patients, but it can also inform those bigger decisions from the bigger guidelines from the NHS and from, NICE guidelines and things. And then obviously you've got the benefit to the general public. So we're all prioritizing public engagement quite a lot at the minute, and I think that's even more important after the pandemic, that the general public are really interested in understanding what our experts have to say about all sorts of areas, not just medicine, but also, various other areas, and making that research accessible for them. Things are published in newspapers all the time, but if you can't go and check and say, well, does this news article actually represent what the scientists said, then that's not very good practice. So having things available for the general public to dip into is also really useful. And all of that is impact. All of that is how your research can be used more widely, can spark new ideas, can inform policy, can inform clinical practice and clinical guidelines, and various other things beyond that. It's all beneficial to give people access to your research.
I'm really glad you broke down the importance of the term impact and all the sort of different nuances that come with it, because it's so easy to just think that impact is comes from the people at the top and sort of getting your research or your data across to sort of companies and other people within higher education. But actually, I'd argue that getting it to the feeding it down to the general public as well is just as important, if
Absolutely.
not more so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're in the age where the public opinion on things is really important and does influence the direction things go. And giving them as many tools as possible to engage with our work is really an important role for academics to be part of. And whether that's just making your data available so that other people can do the public engagement, if you're not particularly skilled at public engagement, because it is a skill, or whether you're on the ground going and speaking to the public day to day yourself, that's something we can all be part of, even if you do freeze when it comes to giving a talk to the general public or speaking to journalists.
Definitely. Before we move on to talking a little bit about the challenges that we face with open research, I noticed you mentioned the COVID pandemic, and I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, was the COVID pandemic a help or a hindrance to this sort of impact and transparency? Because you sort of looked at it in quite a positive way of allowing us to consider impact more seriously. What did you think about that?
So I think there's two sides to this coin, and it's actually an issue that's been circling since long before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, we had a little bit of a situation in the general public where people were starting to distrust experts. There was starting to be a little bit more criticism of experts and criticism of research and people's and I don't think we help ourselves in academia, in that we can sometimes be in our little ivory tower and we can write things in very obtuse language, and we can be very kind of formal about how we do things and how we present our research. And so I understand why the general public might be a bit more wary of the expert opinion. And I think that had been happening for a good few years. And then the pandemic happened. And then suddenly the public had to look to experts to make decisions about really life-changing stuff, and life-changing stuff in the sense of preventing infection and treating infection once as many of us were, once you're infected with COVID, but also those expert decisions about lockdown and understanding public behaviour and understanding how that would affect people and mental health and all the things that came from lockdown. We really relied on experts. And I think for many people in the general public, there was kind of this split. So I think a lot of people really started to trust experts. We showed our working a lot more. We had those briefings, political briefings, where people talked about the science. We had loads more preprints where the science was publicly available. There were loads more news articles talking about the science. So we really did show the benefits that science had and that research had, and made that really accessible. And I think a lot of people in the general public really trusted that and really valued that transparency and openness and conversation and feeling part of the discussion and feeling like they could understand why we were doing the things that we were doing during the pandemic. There was a smaller subset of people who, of course, went down the kind of more negative rabbit hole of, well, this is a conspiracy and all of those kinds of worries. And some of those might have even used preprints to justify their negative views. But I think that was a much smaller proportion of the population. And for the most part, I think it really built trust in research and expertise, and it opened up the conversation. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know I used to look forward to the panel discussions where they'd bring on scientists to talk about, what was going on behind just the headlines and behind the policy making that obviously we were hearing from politicians most of the time. And I used to enjoy having it broken down for me and being cross-referenced with papers and research that were happening at that time. So absolutely, I think we're definitely in an age of embracing open research at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the benefit is we can capitalize on that now, and we can really work towards making the most of that conversation and keeping that conversation going and moving it to other areas, because I'm a big believer, and I would hope that you feel the same, Sarah, as someone who works in the humanities, but I'm a big believer that this should be beyond science. Like, we talk a lot when it comes to open research, we're often guilty of leaning towards open science, but I think actually academic research comes from so many different areas, and it's all massively valuable to everything in our day-to-day lives, and the humanities is a massive part of that.
Absolutely. And one thing that did help me with my humanities and with kind of distributing my own research was the 3-minute thesis competition.
Oh yeah.
I took part in that last year. And
how did you find that?
It was an amazing experience, and it was really great to be there to represent my faculty. And humanities, did really well. We had 3 people make the final, so it's showing that it's coming up just as much now as science, and we're getting research out there, and people are really enjoying hearing about it and tuning into it. So, in light of this era of what we hope is going to be the era of open research, what challenges do you kind of anticipate? What could be the biggest challenges that we may have to face with embracing open research in 2024?
So I think there's a lot of concerns that people have about open research, and a lot of these are kind of individual concerns about open research. So for a lot of people, it just takes more time. If your goal, as is often the case in the academic world, is to publish as much as possible, to do as much research as possible, and then publish as much as possible and publish novel findings in the best journals possible, then adding extra steps to that, adding sharing your data and labeling your data and writing a pre-registration report and working out everything in more detail and being more transparent and sharing things, it does take more time, and we're all time strapped in academia. It does. it does require that dedication to commit to it. And I can understand how that is particularly hard for people who are so incredibly busy. So that is one concern people have. I think there is a lot of fear around open research, particularly the fear about being scooped, that somebody's going to take your idea if you share something early, which again, I understand. I also think things like preprints help with that, because actually you're claiming a stake on that research. You're getting that research published before you've gone through the peer review process. So you know that if anybody says you didn't do it first, well, you can see I published it there. I preprint published it, and then I went on to publish it in a peer reviewed journal after that. So I think it can help with that. I think some areas of academia have got quite competitive and want to progress in that direction, which again, I kind of understand the reasons for that, but actually I think collaboration progresses science much further, and you're much more likely to have new ideas, exciting ideas, and do more research and more exciting research if you're talking to other people and collaborating. One thing that comes up time and time again when I speak to people is privacy, that they might be clinicians, they might be psychologists, they might be speaking to people who are sharing medical data or vulnerable information, and they need to protect the privacy of those people, which is really important and should be a really important part of the open research conversation. There's a phrase that's often used, which is open as possible, closed as necessary. So this is the idea that we make the things that can be open, really open, and where we need to protect people's privacy and data, we are very open and transparent about the fact that we needed to do that, and that part of that research is closed. So I think that's really important. But in 2024, we're really coming into the age of open research. So there are some massive organizations that are involved in open research this year. So we've got the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation has launched fairly recently. NASA have an open research, the year of open research. There are so many massive organizations that are involved in open research this year that I think for the most part, we're going to make positive changes. And with the ref guidance pushing more towards open research and things like that, I think we will be heading in a positive direction. I understand some people have some concerns about it, but hopefully we can convince them that the benefits are greater than the concerns.
Well, that was a brilliant conversation to listen in on. Thank you both for participating in that. So this podcast is the Developing Practice podcast, and we always finish it in the same way, where we ask our guests if they could give maybe 3 or 4 take-home tips that the listeners could reflect on in terms of their own personal development. So if you do have a few of those tips, Alice, for our listeners, what would they be?
So I think some of the tips I would have are just about self-reflection, thinking about your own research. So that would be, think about whether your research could be shared more openly than it currently is. And if you could share it more widely than you already do, why is it that you don't currently? What's the block? Is there a reason of perhaps preventing sharing patient data? Or is it because you just haven't maybe thought enough about how you would make it open, or you don't understand the routes to making things open? Try and identify the ways that you could engage with this a little bit more, and then look to resources to help support that, which might include the University of Liverpool open research pages. We've got loads of resources from the open research team, and a really enthusiastic and supportive team as well. So if you had any specific questions, you could write to us, and we would offer as much support as we could. And there's a bunch of resources at the university to help with making things open access and sharing your data and things like that. The next tip I would have is to consider how you record and label your research and research data. Think about, could you go back to a single experiment and repeat it identically? Have you recorded all of the necessary information to remember exactly what you did and exactly how you did it? Could you find the raw data? How would you access experiments you've done before, or research that you've done before, and answer questions that you've already answered to understand whether you did that the best way the first time? Because once we've had a few years to think about stuff, actually we might have done things differently, and we can go back and look at that. And if you don't think you could you think about how to label things a little bit better? Could you think about how you could write up your methods in a little bit more detail and save them in a more structured way? And then my final tip would be to look at a research paper from someone else. So take a paper that is something you're really interested in, something that you find the research question to be really interesting, and look at a particular individual piece of research that they've done and think, could you find all the information that you need to repeat? You would need to repeat what they did. Is there anything missing? What information would you need, and what information is in that paper, and see where that disparity is. And can you use that insight to help write your own methods? Can you write your methods in a little bit more detail to give a little bit more structure?
Brilliant. Thanks for the tips, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I've had a great time.